Welcome to the debate. Historically, making anything, like a chair, an essay, a piece of art, it was defined by physical friction. You selected the wood, you sanded it down, you painstakingly carved every leg, and, that sheer labor was considered a huge part of the value.
Right. The effort itself was the art.
Exactly. But today, artificial intelligence has essentially handed solo operators the keys to a fully automated intellectual factory. So the core question we are grappling with today is this. When solo creators use AI to achieve massive scale, to operate like massive media machines, does that unprecedented scale liberate their creative spark, or does it completely hollow it out?
And it really is a question of what happens when that friction disappears entirely. I mean, if you remove the knots in the wood, if you eliminate the slight asymmetry of human effort, you cross a fundamental threshold. You transition from being an artisan to, well, a factory manager.
Yeah.
The scale is undeniably there, obviously, but the eccentricity, the very idiosyncrasy that makes the work yours, it just gets lost on the assembly line.
Well, our discussion today emerges from some really fascinating recent analysis detailing exactly this profound shift in our working models. The workflow data we're examining shows AI is moving far beyond just assisting humans with isolated tasks.
Like spell check or basic formatting, yeah.
Right, exactly. It is actively taking over end-to-end workflows. A single creator can now leverage this technology to function like an entire media company. And I will be arguing today that this level of automation actually liberates the creator. By removing the structural friction of production and handling the crushing administrative burden, AI decouples effort from output, which means genuine human insight can finally scale globally.
And I will be arguing that compressing the traditional creative process into a machine-driven pipeline radically alters the nature of the work itself. By shifting the standard to a machine-first, human oversight model, we aren't scaling original thought. We are diluting it. We are effectively reducing creators to mere supervisors of highly generic, statistically average output.
Okay, so to set the baseline, here we have to acknowledge the historical dilemma of the creator economy. Before these vast language models came along, if you wanted to reach a wider audience or, produce more material, you basically faced a binary choice.
Burnout or bankruptcy.
Pretty much. You either worked longer hours until you inevitably burned out, or you raised capital to hire a massive team of writers, researchers, and editors. AI fundamentally shatters that equation. It acts as an infinitely scalable team. By automating the structural heavy lifting, the drafting of outlines, the audience data analysis, the formatting, a solo individual becomes the director of an intelligent production system.
But a director who isn't really making the movie anymore?
I disagree, because the crucial piece is that the core insight remains human. Audiences don't form parasocial relationships with algorithms. They follow specific insights, shared values, trust. AI merely provides the leverage to deliver that unique human perspective without the associated operational exhaustion.
I come at it from a different way. When you replace entire chains of creative tasks, from the initial brainstorming phase to the drafting, the revising, the distribution, you're fundamentally altering the cognitive process of creation.
How so?
Well, the shift documented in this research points out that we are moving away from human effort actually driving the process. When a machine generates the first draft and you simply step in to tweak it, you are no longer the generator of the initial spark. You're editing for exceptions.
Right, but
And because these systems are trained on massive data sets of past human behavior, they inherently regress to the mean. You aren't scaling your unique authorial voice at all. You are passing it through a statistical filter that strips out exactly what makes it valuable in the first place.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how that initial phase actually works in practice. You are framing the friction of creation, like staring at the blank page, struggling with syntax, as this sacred, necessary crucible for originality.
Because it often is.
But let's look at the cognitive load theory behind this. For most people, the mental burden of formatting an idea gets in the way of the idea itself. Let's say you have a profound, hard-earned insight about behavioral psychology. The hardest part isn't the insight, it's organizing it into a coherent digital structure. The research notes that AI provides a conceptual scaffold.
A scaffold. Right.
Yes, it holds up the structural framework of the essay or the script, which keeps your momentum alive. The creator is then free to focus all their cognitive energy on the high-level synthesis, the tone, and the specific nuances of their argument, rather than exhausting their working memory on transitions and formatting.
The scaffolding analogy sounds appealing, I'll admit, but it completely fails to capture the actual mechanics of how large language models operate. Look, a scaffold is completely inert. It just sits there supporting the human workers who are doing the actual building.
Sure.
But AI is not inert. It is generative and it is predictive. When you ask an LLM to provide that first draft or that outline, it is mathematically calculating the most probable next sequence of words based on billions of existing documents. It is actively predicting the safest, most statistically common path from point A to point B.
But that predictive path provides a baseline. It provides the standard grammar of the medium.
Yes, but the friction of the blank page, which you want to optimize away so badly, is exactly where the happy accidents of human thought occur. When you are forced to synthesize your thoughts without a predictive safety net, you make unexpected, low-probability conceptual connections. You go down weird mental tangents.
But most tangents are just bad writing.
No, that struggle is where eccentricity is born. If the machine lays down the safest, most highly probable draft, and you are just coming in to refine the edges, you are anchored to a generic foundation. You aren't building a unique structure. You're walking into a prefabricated house and deciding what color to paint the drywall. You are outsourcing the very mechanism of discovery.
But you're still reacting.
You are reacting to it, yes, but it accelerates the refinement phase. You reach the 80% mark instantly, which means you have exponentially more time to spend on the critical, idiosyncratic 20% that actually defines your voice. But you are still operating within the parameters set by the machine. You are reacting, not originating. And let's look at how that reactive workflow fundamentally changes the creator's role as described in the material. The system receives the prompt, drafts the response, refines the language, and logs the interaction. It is a closed, enclosed process. You are no longer discovering what you think by writing it out. You are reacting to what an algorithm guesses you think.
I think that's a bit reductive.
It's what the data shows. The cognitive load hasn't just shifted, the core act of synthesis has been outsourced.
Well, if we accept for a moment that AI alters that initial drafting phase, we have to look at the blast radius of that output once it moves into distribution, because the way that synthesized idea scales is really where the paradigm shifts. The workflow data highlights the repurposing engine as the smartest scaling strategy available today.
The repurposing engine. Right.
Think about it. A creator develops one core piece of high-value content, say an incredibly well-researched market analysis. With AI, that single piece of human insight can be instantly translated into a newsletter, a highly structured social media thread, a podcast script, and visual carousel posts.
And 50 other things nobody asked for?
But people do consume them. More importantly, AI localizes this content. It doesn't just swap vocabulary words, it adjusts cultural idioms. A solo analyst in Brazil can suddenly reach an audience in Japan in their native linguistic style without having to rebuild the entire piece from scratch. This multiplies the reach of a genuine human insight without requiring a proportional increase in human effort.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. This vast repurposing engine you're describing is precisely how the digital ecosystem is being flooded with an unprecedented volume of homogenized noise.
Noise? It's the same core insight.
Yes, it multiplies output. But let's use a mechanical analogy here. Think about lossy audio compression, like an MP3 file. When you compress an original high-fidelity audio recording to make it easy to transmit globally, the algorithm mathematically strips out the extremely high frequencies and the subtle lows, the eccentricities that take up too much data.
Sure, compression loses some fidelity.
Right. And it sounds perfectly fine on cheap headphones, but true audiophiles can hear that it's completely flat. When you take one human idea and run it through an automated localization and repurposing pipeline to extrude it into 10 different formats, you are applying lossy compression to human thought. You are trimming away the vital context.
I don't agree that translating an idea into an accessible format inherently strips its value.
If the core productivity framework or market analysis is robust, the value survives the formatting process.
But the process itself changes the creator's relationship to the audience. Let's draw a direct parallel to the workflow shifts the source material highlights in the finance sector. It notes that processes like loan approvals, fraud checks, and risk scoring used to be handled by teams of human analysts, making nuanced, holistic judgments.
Right, and now algorithms do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. Today, AI handles the entire pipeline, and human roles have been downgraded to exception handling. The human only steps in when an algorithm flags an anomaly or a legal risk. Content creators are adopting the exact same model. They are mass-producing these localized variants, trusting the machine to understand the cultural nuances of a Japanese audience, and only stepping in if a user complains or engagement drops. That isn't building a genuine cultural bridge. That is broadcasting noise at an industrial scale and managing the fallout.
The finance analogy is fascinating, but it breaks down when applied to media because the end products have completely different success metrics. I mean, a loan approval is an objective binary transaction. Media and content inherently rely on a parasocial connection.
Which is exactly why automating it is so dangerous.
But if a creator is just broadcasting generic, compressed noise, the audience will simply leave. The market self-corrects. The creators who succeed at this scale aren't exception handlers, they are high-level arbiters of taste. They rigorously review the localized outputs to ensure their voice remains intact. The AI handles the syntax and the platform-specific formatting, but the human remains the absolute gatekeeper of quality.
Okay, but when you are producing 10 times the volume across 5 different languages and platforms, your capacity to act as a rigorous arbiter degrades exponentially. You literally do not have the time to inject deep idiosyncrasy into 50 localized posts a day. You inevitably become a bottleneck in your own automated factory.
You just have to manage your time better.
It's not about time management. Because you are the bottleneck, you start letting the good enough statistical average slide through just to feed the algorithm.
Which brings us perfectly to what the creator actually does with their time now. If the machinery of production and distribution is largely autonomous, what is the creator's daily reality? Are they an alienated supervisor or an empowered director? I contend that this shift elevates the creator to a true creative director.
A director of what exactly?
A director of their entire business. Look at the operational reality outlined in the research. Generating the core idea is only a fraction of a media business. Creators have to manage complex customer inquiries, schedule marketing sequences, write sales pages for digital products, organize cross-promotions, analyze engagement metrics. By automating these heavy administrative and support tasks, creators protect their cognitive energy.
So they're just outsourcing the boring stuff.
Yes. They spend significantly less time acting like overworked customer service reps and far more time acting like high-level strategists. Because they aren't exhausted by writing 50 marketing emails, their actual creative spark is preserved for the core product.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the profound organizational change the material actually outlines regarding how we define work? The distinction between a task and a process is critical to understanding why this alienation occurs.
Okay, break that down for me.
A task is a single, isolated action, like formatting a photo, sending an email. A process is a sequential chain of actions that leads to a final outcome. The research makes it incredibly clear here. AI is no longer just optimizing tasks. It is subsuming entire processes. It receives a customer inquiry, checks the proprietary knowledge base, drafts the appropriate response, schedules the follow-up, and logs the interaction without any human involvement unless a predefined threshold is crossed.
Right, which means the creator doesn't have to spend 3 hours a day doing it. That is a massive operational victory.
It's an operational victory, yes, but a philosophical loss. When an AI takes over the entire sequence of operations, when it generates the article outlines, drafts the newsletter, answers the community emails, and analyzes the performance data, the human role fundamentally degrades from operational director to mere supervisor.
I wouldn't say degrades.
But think about what it means to maintain an authentic human brand. Can a creator genuinely claim to be offering a human-centric connection
when 95% of the audience's interactions, the scheduling, the community management, the drafting, are handled entirely by a machine.
It depends on what the audience expects.
The text explicitly warns about transparency and accountability here. If your audience believes they're connecting with your unique authorial voice, but they are actually interacting with a localized, continuously repurposed algorithm trained to mimic you, the core trust of that parasocial relationship breaks down. You aren't directing a vision anymore. You are overseeing a simulation of yourself.
See, I think that paints a deeply cynical picture of the audience's priorities. The source material emphasizes repeatedly that audiences follow creators for insight and specialized knowledge. If a creator uses AI to write the HTML for a sales page or to automatically route community support tickets, the audience truly does not care who drafted that specific operational copy.
They HTML, sure, but what about the actual communication?
They care about the insight inside the actual course or the validity of the market analysis they paid for. By quarantining the repetitive machinery of the business, the creator is actually respecting the audience's time by delivering higher quality core products faster. The human spark isn't simulating itself, it's just delegating the logistics.
You are trying to separate the logistics from the art as if they don't constantly influence each other. But the medium always shapes the message. When the standard operational procedure across the entire creator economy becomes machine first, human oversight, the way creators actually formulate their thoughts fundamentally changes. We move from a creator economy into an editor economy.
And what's wrong with an editor economy?
In an editor economy, you start subconsciously optimizing your initial ideas for how easily the AI can digest and repurpose them.
Wait, what do you mean by optimizing your ideas for the AI?
I mean that if you know your entire distribution strategy relies on an AI pipeline breaking your essay into 5 highly structured social media carousels and a translated newsletter, you stop writing quirky, structurally complex, or deeply layered pieces. You know the AI struggles to cleanly parse ambiguity or deep irony into a 5-slide carousel.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right? The machine's technical limitations become the creator's creative limitations. You start thinking in easily parsable bullet points so the algorithm can do its job smoothly. The human oversight simply becomes a rubber stamp on the machine's structural preferences. The spark isn't protected by delegating the logistics. It is smothered by the demands of the pipeline.
That is a fascinating critique of how scale changes behavior. Really. But it assumes the creator entirely surrenders their agency to the pipeline. I would argue that the truly successful media brands of the future will be the ones who use the pipeline to handle the baseline, precisely so they can afford the time to inject that deep irony or structural complexity into the pieces that matter most. We are reaching the end of our time now, so let's look at where these workflow shifts leave us.
Fair enough.
My position remains that AI is the ultimate democratizing tool for intellectual labor. By breaking the historic linear relationship between time spent and output generated, it empowers solo operators to scale their insights globally. It removes the friction of the blank page and the exhaustion of administration, allowing individuals to act as visionary directors rather than exhausted laborers.
And my position is that outsourcing the core sequential processes of creation to a predictive, probabilistic workflow comes with an immense philosophical and practical cost. It risks turning creators into mere exception handlers of an automated, statistically average content pipeline. It strips away the necessary friction and the weird, unpredictable tangents that historically produce true originality.
However, looking at the breadth of the analysis today, there is a very clear area of convergence between us. Efficiency, no matter how perfectly scaled, is absolutely not enough. We both agree, and the data explicitly emphasizes this, that human audiences demand genuine insight and trust.
Absolutely.
A perfectly automated localization engine that produces logically sound but intellectually hollow content will ultimately fail in the market. It lacks the authentic, idiosyncratic voice that makes the content worth consuming in the first place.
Exactly. The core challenge moving forward is how to preserve that genuine trust when the underlying machinery of production becomes increasingly synthetic. If an audience ever feels managed rather than authentically engaged, the massive scale actually works against the creator by destroying their credibility at an industrial speed.
And this profound tension, this delicate balancing act between achieving unprecedented scale and preserving human judgment is not isolated to a few people making videos or writing newsletters online. As the research suggests, there is much more to explore regarding how these exact same machine-first, human oversight workflows are fundamentally redesigning the concepts of accountability, transparency, and fairness in highly traditional sectors.
Right. We are seeing these exact same debates play out in law, in manufacturing, and in healthcare.
Because the redesign of the human process itself is happening everywhere. We are actively deciding in real time across every industry what the irreducible core of human work actually means.
Precisely.
So, as we close today, we leave it to you, the listener, to decide where that balance ultimately lies. Think back to that perfectly manufactured, beautifully polished wooden chair we talked about at the very beginning. Is this automated scale a triumph of democratization, finally giving everyone the tools to build and share their ideas globally without burning out? Or, in our rush to eliminate friction, are we losing the texture, the complex knots, and the evidence of struggle that made the human effort worthwhile in the first place?
It is certainly something to interrogate the next time you read a flawlessly formatted, perfectly translated post on your feed.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.